I've always said, and I still do, I'm the luckiest person I've ever met. And if you read the book, I do seem to stumble from one moment or period of huge good fortune straight into another. I would have to single out two periods about which I feel particularly lucky. One was to have been booking all those huge bands and organising all those concerts at Leeds University when I was only 20 years of age, running that venue, it was like a professional venue, as a kid. After the sheer good fortune of becoming a Radio 1 DJ, accidentally, and I think I'm the only presenter in the station's history who's ever become a Radio 1 DJ without even trying to become one, as a music obsessive, and have my own music programme in which I had a free hand in the choice of music, again, very lucky. The main component of huge good fortune was to have been, within weeks of arriving there, was to have been posted to the legendary room 318, which I shared with two giants of broadcasting, John Peel and John Walters, our shared producer. And Walters, one of the most naturally funny men you have ever met, and also just a great visionary. And what an experience, what an induction to public service broadcasting and BBC National Radio. What better induction could I have had to those things than to have been brought into that room with those two guys, Peel and Walters. What great teachers, what examples. I'm probably not a very good person to ask about the current state of music. I'm probably not somebody with an entirely objective and neutral perspective. And again, it comes down to me having been so lucky in earlier days. There have been, obviously, in the history of rock music, there have been peaks and troughs. And at my time of very, very close involvement, whether that was putting on the gigs at Leeds University or then presenting the whistle test and being on Radio 1 for 15 years, a lot of those years coincided with one of the very big peaks. And by peaks, I mean a kind of richness of talent abounding and a lot of creativity and imagination. But there were an awful lot of very good bands around in that period of the late 70s, early 80s. And I was very fortunate to be closely involved then. And there was some great music that was made. And I would say it was the last great period of creativity. For me now, because I was lucky enough to have been involved back then, just about everything I've heard since sounds second rate, or even they'd be doing well to be second rate, third rate. I mean, Britpop, do me a favour, please. You know, the whole kind of tragic array of derivative 60s wannabes was just really pathetic. And holding up Blur or Oasis as first-rate rock bands, no, I'm sorry. If you want first-rate rock bands, you had to go back a bit. If they don't live up to what we've had before, then I'm just going to listen to what we had before. That doesn't mean I've got closed ears or a closed mind. Not at all. I am dying for the next thing to come along in the context of rock music or rock and roll and shake me. Please do. I'm here. I'm waiting. I've been waiting for about 25 years. But there's not a lot, really, that's impressed me. Which is why, and this was something that I noticed as long ago as the mid-80s, which is why, because I was bored with Anglo-American rock and pop back then, I sort of boosted my audio radar onto an international horizon. And I did ask myself, you know, if things are as boring as this in the UK, I thought, well, let's look somewhere else. And I started to hear stuff like Township Jive from South Africa. Even before Paul Simon made Graceland with those musicians. I thought, hey, wait a minute, this rocks, you know. And if what's coming out of the UK and the United States is dreary at the moment, this'll do for me. And then suddenly a whole continent opened up. And they called it world music, although I didn't. Inevitably, in my position, and given my history, I'm very often asked, what's the greatest gig you've ever seen? And I can't tell you, because, again, Mr. Lucky, I saw so many great gigs And I saw all the great bands of that period, and I don't think we've had the creativity and the imagination to touch that since in the last 25 years. And I saw a lot of the greats when they were in their prime. And I can't pick one out. I can't single one out from... There's a bunch of them. There's probably 4 or 5 I'd have to bring it down to. I could bring it down to. One was Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. The last time they were spotted in the conventional surroundings of a 3,000-seat theatre in the UK, before they started playing at the NEC Birmingham or some football stadium, which was the Manchester Apollo at the time of The River, the double album that Springsteen and the band released towards the end of 1980. And to be sitting that close up to Springsteen with that fabulous band, it was so contagiously physical and romantic. The other one was to get right to the front to see Bob Marley and the Wailers at the Bingley Hall in Stafford, which is basically a giant cowshed, a cattle market, at the Stafford County Showgrounds in the summer of 1980 for what turned out to be Bob Marley's last UK tour. And to be in there, but to be like right there underneath him, that was tremendous, absolutely tremendous. That moment when from the speaker stacks slipped that Hammond organ intro of doobie doobie doo, and the place just went up like a chip pan. The start of No Woman No Cry. Johnny Cash at Glastonbury in 1984, I digress slightly, because that was a bit later, when I had to bring him on at Glastonbury, full story of that in the book as well. That was such an emotional moment. I cried, Johnny Cash cried, 120,000 people cried. But the other one, that trio in 1980, would be Thursday, January the 31st, Leeds University Refectory, and it was The Clash on their tour to promote London Calling, which was called the 16 Tons Tour for some reason. And that ranks to me as one of the greatest rock and roll gigs I ever saw and probably ever will see, because of The Clash being what they were at that particular point in their history. In that flash of lightning that night, they had everything. They were the fully finished, rounded article. They were the last word in rock and roll bands that night, and I know why it was too. It's also the reason that London Calling is not only their greatest record, it's one of the great rock and roll albums at all time, because they'd had this silly policy, like an almost Khmer Rouge Year Zero policy, of pretending that any music that came before them was of no value and couldn't be recognised, couldn't be acknowledged. Shortly before London Calling, thank God they ditched that. And they were all members of the Clash, were all big music fans in different areas. And they allowed all those enthusiasms to come to the surface and to flourish and to inform the music both on stage and on that record, which before they'd kept suppressed. So suddenly you had an album which was driven by elements of R&B, country, blues, old rock and roll, ska, dub reggae. It all came through in one glorious kind of confection or cocktail. And that also was what happened on stage that night at Leeds in January 1980. They'd been going at that stage for about 5 years as a band. And whilst their early scratchy fury was impressive when I'd seen them before, it was limited. And they not only let these personal and musical enthusiasms come through to inform what they were doing, they'd simply with time learn to play a lot better. So they just gelled. In that flash of lightning, everything came together, and to cap it all off, they had that almost indefinable quality which you can't buy and you can't learn. You've either got it or you haven't, and it comes down to the personalities and the chemistry between them. They had elan. Elan was the word, and by God, they were good that night. And really, uncommonly, I didn't take many pictures at the gigs at Leeds. That night, I took a camera. I don't know what made me do it, but I'm bloody glad I did. And I got actually some rather good photographs. One of them of Mick Jones and Joe Strummer together towards the front of the stage. And I've just got Strummer in that pose like that. And I love to think he's just at that moment in London Calling where he's going, the Ice Age is coming. God, they were tremendous that night.